front end as good as new.
Yeah, with no problems. Everything is direct bolt-in. And also, just for a tip, when you get your new parts in, if you have not removed your old ones, you see as we use when you take your power steering lines off, use your caps out of these and just put some tape over that until you're done. That way this fluid's not leaking in your eye and in your hair and all over your shop floor while you're trying to get your old parts off.
It's a good idea. And something else, Danny, these lines here can be a bit confusing to put back on.
That's correct.
And if you put them on wrong, your hydraulic valve will go all over the place.
That's right.
And you can put them on wrong. So it's a good idea to look at your old power steering valve and notice where your lines go before you set your new one up with new lines on it. And also, you can purchase a brand new pitman arm from Vette Brakes and Products. If you damage your old one removing it, or if your vehicle's been involved in a collision, there's any suspicion that yours is bent, it's a good idea to replace it. But Danny, you also want to make sure that this is in the correct location on your gearbox, right?
That's correct, Chris. And I believe how you would find center on your steering box is turn all the way to the right, all the way to the left, and count your turns until you get back to the center. Is that correct, Chris?
That would be correct. And you would want to note the orientation that your old arm was on in relation to your steering and try to set it back up as close as possible to the same to make sure that your steering is centered, as well as testing it out. In the previous segment, we talked about how to pull your stock steering system out of the vehicle. We showed you some of the wear items that are common on a stock system and described what's necessary in putting the replacement parts in there. On this particular vehicle, though, our 1969 project car, we've decided to go with a rack and pinion system, and we're getting ready to install that. We wanted to talk to you about it for a few moments before we did. First couple things, again, just to point out, it bolts back in the same location that your stock system came out of. So it's a big plus. Once all of your stock system is out of the way, including the stock steering gearbox, you're in a position to begin reassembly. This bolts on your driver's side. The other bracket there bolts onto the passenger side where your idle arm went, and everything else will slip into place. A couple things we'll do to make the job easier is I will go ahead and attach, or actually Danny and I will go ahead and attach the power steering lines to this location before we slip it in place, and we'll put it in there. Also, on this particular vehicle, we have opted to put a new power steering pump on it. Vehicle's a 1969. We need to have good quality pressure, no leaks, no worries. It's a good time to replace the pump. The pump does not come with a rack and pinion kit, but it's highly recommended on an old vehicle like this that you update it, and that way everything is fresh and new. In order to get this system installed on the car, we're going to start out by bolting the brackets to the frame. We've also pre-bolted the center bracket to the rack and pinion assembly. Once the brackets are on the frame, we're going to lift the rack and pinion assembly directly into the vehicle. You ready to go?
Yeah. This first bracket goes in place, directly bolted in to where your idler arm came off of. And I have Chris up on top to assist me with this bracket. We're going to slide this right on in place here. You ready, Chris?
Okay, Danny, slide it up. Now these bolts are different than your stock bolts. These aren't carriage bolts. Once you put these through the frame mounts, you'll need to have a helper or reach around and put a wrench on both sides of the frame to tighten them up. Fine thread. Okay, we'll start with the top.
Okay guys, we got our first bracket in place, bolted directly into the stock location where the idle arm was. Now we're ready to go ahead and install our second bracket where our steering box was.
Now we're putting the driver's side rack and pinion bracket on. This bracket bolts through the stock location of the stock steering gearbox through these three holes. It also uses a lateral support bracket that bolts to this bracket and also bolts to the frame through the stock power steering support holes. This bracket not only holds the rack and pinion in place through the front portion here, but it also holds the steering shaft support on the rear portion. In order to install this bracket, the steering gearbox has to be removed and the stock steering gear bolts have to come out. And the one that's just behind the fender flare here requires a little bit of pulling and prying to pull the fender back to remove it. Once that's removed, you can pull the fender out a little bit and slide the new hardware in place. I'm going to pass this through to Danny and we're going to go ahead and set it in place. All the bolts and hardware need to be loosely fit before you begin torquing and tightening anything down. Okay, Danny, here you go.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
Okay, you're good on this end. Tell you what, if you want to start one of the bottom nuts, then I'll start one of the top ones. Now that the main bracket's in, we're going to slide the support bracket in through the stock location on the frame, the stock mounting hardware. Okay, Danny?
Thank you.
Now, if your car was not a power steering car, you won't have these studs in the frame. You'll have to actually put bolts in. The holes will already be there, and you'll need to work through this hole in the frame in order to hold your bolts in place. Or you may want to tack weld some bolts in if it's a non-power steering car. But as far as a power steering car, all of that hardware is already in place for you, so the bracket will go right in place. And again, nothing's going to be tightened down tight right now. Everything's a finger tight set until all the hardware is in place. And once Danny has that on, he'll take these grade 8 fine thread bolts with the locking nuts and attach that bracket directly to the main bracket. We'll take a little bit closer look at the lines on this rack and pinion system so you can see how simple it actually is. Your line's hooked to the rack and pinion system right here. Of course, your pump is going to be mounted to your engine, but just to give you an idea, your return line's going to slip right onto your pump right here, and your pressure line's going to screw right onto the back of the pump, as you can see in this location, once it's in the vehicle like so. If you are running a Hydro Boost type braking system, which we will cover later in the segment, you'll simply tap into these lines to provide the power steering pressure to the braking system. Okay guys, now we're getting ready to put the rack and pinion assembly into the vehicle. A couple things we did before we got to this point. First of all, we put all the mounting brackets in place through the stock locations. They're torqued down and hanging at this point in time. We also took a measurement from the tip of the ball joint, from the tip of the tie rod end to the tip of the tie rod end on the stock steering, and we rough set this tie rod set to approximately the same width. That'll make it easy to drive the car to the alignment shop as soon as we're done here. We've also fit the power steering hoses on here, and they're ready to go in position, and we're ready to hoist the rack and pinion into place now. So Danny, you ready to lift it up?
I'm ready, Chris.
Okay. Okay, once it's in place, the rack and pinion assembly will sit against the brackets. It has a pair of rubber isolator mounts. It takes 2 bolts per side. We're putting the bolts in from the rear and sliding them forward. Thank you, Danny. All right, we're going to go back and torque those down. Now you'll notice on the end, on the tie rod end, these are fully adjustable tie rod ends. They come with additional washers. These can be used when they go to the alignment shop to set your final bump steer. So it's fully adjustable, but we're going to go ahead right now so we can get the car rolling and slide the tie rods in place and apply our lock washer on top. A couple of interesting things you'll notice about this rack and pinion. It does hang down what appears to be low at first glance, but you'll notice that it's no lower than the oil pan on the vehicle, and it's tucked up close to the rest of the suspension components, so it's actually in a very safe location. Once you get to the alignment shop, they'll be able to do the final adjustment on the tie rods and lock everything down, and they can test out the bump steer and do the adjustment on the final end and determine if any additional washers need to be added. And that's it, Danny. We'll hook the power steering lines up to the pump. We're ready to go.
Now Chris, this actually looked faster, easier, and simpler to put this in than it was to put all the stock steering back in it.
Absolutely.
And it looks a lot cleaner underneath the vehicle, and just, what aspect is it going to give me on a touring or a driving on a daily driver? What aspect is it going to give me, Chris?
This is going to give you a tighter steering feel. It's less than 3 turns lock to lock. It's clean, it's neat, there's less moving pieces underneath here. It's a lighter weight piece, and as you'll notice in the engine bay with the removal of the steering gearbox, there's plenty of extra room up there now to work on your engine and to clean and detail things. So it's a better system all the way around. It's a good fit for an overall stock vehicle or a performance car.
These adjustable tie rods and all for the racetrack, and the bump steer settings are make it